Welcome to the session on SD-WAN deployment strategies. Today, joining with me on the panel are Kural from Technical Marketing. Hi, Kural.
Thanks, Ali. Glad to be here.
And joining him is Sukrut, also a member of the Technical Marketing Group.
Hi, Ali. Good to be here.
Thanks, Sukrut. And today, the topic will focus on the different methods that can be adopted to deploy the SD-WAN solution. Presenting for us is David Klebanov, a leader in our Technical Marketing Solutions Group. Hi, David.
Hello, Ali. Thank you for having me here. Today we're going to talk about Cisco SD-WAN deployment strategies. Specifically, we're going to talk about three topics. We're going to talk about the actual deployment options. We're going to go over the different deployment options of deploying the Cisco SD-WAN solution as a cloud-delivered solution, as a partner-delivered solution, or as a self-delivered solution in the customer data centers. So we're going to cover those options in the deployment options. Then we're going to talk about the service management and some of the automation that comes with managing the Cisco SD-WAN solution. And eventually, we're going to talk about multi-tenancy, which could be in the form of multi-tenancy or a single-tenant solution, depends on a specific deployment that we're going to cover in the deployment options. So let's talk about the deployment options. As I mentioned, there are three primary deployment options that exist for Cisco SD-WAN. The first and the preferred option is the cloud-delivered solution, where the Cisco SD-WAN is delivered out of the Cisco public backend cloud. The second option is an opportunity for partners to have the Cisco SD-WAN solution as a partner-delivered solution. And we're going to talk about some of the specifics, what partner-delivered solution really means. And at the end, some of our customers, based on regulatory compliance or some other specific requirements, actually have to opt for an on-prem delivered solution where the entire solution resides in their own environment, and specifically the control and management infrastructure of the solution resides in their own private data centers. So as you can see, three different deployment models. They're all powered by three different types of backend clouds. And again, the Cisco Cloud, which is the Cisco public cloud backend that powers the Cisco delivered solution, the partner cloud or a partner environment that powers the partner delivered solution, and at the end, the private data center that powers the solution when it's deployed in the customer data centers by the customers themselves.
So David, what are we trying to deploy here?
Okay. It's a good question. So what we're talking about here is really pertains to the deployment of the control and management infrastructure. So Cisco SD-WAN is an SDN, software-defined networking solution, and as such, it identifies several architectural tiers. So data plane, control plane, and management plane. In this particular case, what we're talking about is really the deployment of the control plane and management plane, which is in our solution, the vManage and the vSmart and the vBond elements. Those are the key core elements of the solution. And when we talk about the different delivery models of the Cisco SD-WAN solution, we're really talking about how those three core elements of vManage, vBond, and vSmart get delivered. Whether they get delivered in a Cisco cloud, whether they get delivered in a partner environment, which could be partner cloud or partner data centers, or whether they delivered in the private data centers of the customers themselves.
So David, may be good to highlight on the board, just to write it out, to say vManage, vSmart, vBond. Those are the ones that we're focusing on.
That's a very good point, right. So what we're talking here is, again, as I mentioned, the solution elements of the SD-WAN infrastructure, which is really the management piece of it in a form of a vManage, which is a virtual element. We're not going to discuss in this particular section how that gets delivered and what are some of the attributes of that. But keep in mind that this is the management element of the solution. It's all virtualized. So vManage. Then we have the vSmart, which is the control plane of the solution. And then we have the vBond, which is the orchestration engine to orchestrate the connectivity between the controllers and between the VH routers, be those traditional VH routers that we brought into Cisco or the Cisco routers that are running the SD-WAN code, right? So these are the SD-WAN edge devices. So the connectivity that we really talked about, the orchestration piece of that and where that resides, really talks about this control element, control and management element of the solution. Right? So it's a good point to illustrate that those are the elements that when we talk about the delivery of the Cisco SD-WAN solution in those different environments, we're really talking about the delivery of that virtual control and management and orchestration infrastructure within either Cisco Cloud backend, partner environment, or customer on-prem.
Good question. Since you mentioned about deploying this in cloud, I'm assuming all of these are virtual.
Yes.
But are all these different functions from the same appliance, or are different appliances different?
It's a good question. Yes. So first of all, yes, it's all virtual, right? And again, we're not going to go into the details of how the actual deployment works in this particular case. But for the sake of this conversation, yes, they're all virtual. Yes, they're all separate. Each one of those plays a separate role within the SD-WAN solution. vManage is the management plane of the solution. It is a standalone element of the solution. It's delivered in the form of a virtual machine. It could be a single tenant, it could be multi-tenant, it could be deployed as a single virtual machine, could be deployed as a cluster of virtual machines. It is a virtual instances, right, in either a single instance or a scale-out model, but it's deployed as a separate element. Then the vSmarts are also virtual machines. They're separate from vManage. So they are standalone element, right? Again, they're deployed as, well, very rarely as a single element because you would want redundancy for your control plane infrastructure. So you're really talking about several vSmarts, at least two for redundancy. Again, virtual machines, but separate from the vManage. We want to make sure that we follow the philosophy of the software-defined networking, where we have the separation of the duties of control plane, management plane, and data plane, so we don't really sort of bundle them together and make sure that that modularity gives the system, first, the ability to scale them individually and horizontally. And in case something happens and a certain failure occurs, that failure is not a cascading failure that takes away sort of the guts of the system, right? Same thing applies for the vBond. It's yet another virtual element of the solution. It has some specific role. We're not going to dive deep into this, but it has to do with orchestrating the connectivity between the controllers and between the SD-WAN edge devices and the controllers, right? Again, another element separate from the virtual, from the vManage and vSmart, delivered in the virtual form factor, horizontally scalable, just like the rest of the elements.
And David, since you mentioned virtual so many times, I was wondering if there is any specific hypervisor on which these go on, or do we support on all the hypervisors which are out there?
Very good question. So depends on how that infrastructure gets delivered, obviously. When we're talking about the delivery in the private data centers and potentially in the partner cloud, if that cloud is somewhere in the partner colocation facility or a partner data center, what we're talking about is, again, just like you pointed out, a hypervisor platform. So what we support today is the two most commonly encountered hypervisor platforms, which is the VMware ESXi or KVM. Linux KVM. Those are the two predominant platform or hypervisor platforms that we see that exist in the market, and those are the platforms that we support. Obviously, that runs on the x86 server of a sort. Again, customers or partners have a choice of which platform they want to choose for this. They can choose a Cisco platform, which Cisco offers, a compute platform in the form of the ENCS server. But they're also free to choose any x86 platform as long as they can load an ESXi or KVM hypervisor on it. And of course, all of these elements, they would be delivered in the form of the virtual machines that would be residing on this server. Now, for the purposes of redundancy, obviously, most likely that they will have more than one of those x86 machines in order to make sure that should something happen to that particular server, then the system is resilient, and then the same sort of if one vSmart controller is hosted on this server and the server goes down, obviously we want to make sure that it fails over to the other controllers that would be hosted in other server. So it's a good point. For the For the cloud delivery, obviously, we're not using the hypervisors such as ESXi and KVM. For the Cisco Cloud backend, we're using this cloud platform. In our case, it's AWS or Microsoft Azure. So obviously, they use a different underlying platform. So we're using the virtualization functionality of those public cloud platforms in order to host those control elements on top.
Thank you.
Another quick question. In the private data center, can the customer themselves use public clouds like AWS or other public clouds to deploy the solution there?
It's a good question. I would say the case would be a little bit different. If we are talking about private data center, this is really customer's private environment. So this is the environment which is in their own on-premise data center. What sounds like what you're alluding to is the case where a customer wants to use a public cloud environment, yet deploy the infrastructure themselves. So that option is possible. Not something we see very often for reasons is that if we go with the Cisco Cloud backend, we have all the automation tools around that. If a customer were to do that by themselves, obviously it's the customer's responsibility to now come up with the orchestration tools in order to be able to have these deployments. We have orchestration tools in Cisco that can help that, but that means that the orchestration has to play a more significant role in this. When it's deployed in the private data centers hosted on ESXi or KVM platforms, we assume that customers already have virtualized data centers, so they already have the tooling required to deploy those virtual elements onto their private data center infrastructure. So that case is sort of easier, but it is possible for them to take the same elements of vSmart, vBond, and vManage and deploy them in public cloud environments, yet they would not be using our orchestration tool, they'll be using something of their own.
Okay. So when you say partner cloud, do you mean service provider, or is it like what kind of partner?
Yeah, so it's a good, it's a little bit abstracted here when it says partner cloud, right? It may not necessarily be a cloud, right? What it says basically, partners, be those some of the managed service providers or some of the main system integrators, they can operate their own compute environment. So what we really mean in here by saying public partner cloud is really a compute environment operated by the partner. Now, these are the three main ones, but that's where you could start kind of splitting into smaller ones. You can say, well, can a partner, just like the case before with a private data center, can a partner use a public cloud backend of their own? For example, can a partner go and procure a service from AWS and start hosting the Cisco SD-WAN control and management infrastructure in their own instances of that public cloud? They can, right? Again, just like the case with the end customers, they'll have to do the orchestration and all the things that have to do with operationalizing the service. But it's absolutely possible. So this partner cloud is sort of a little bit of an abstracted term of a compute infrastructure that a partner operates. Be that an on-prem, a co-location facility, or even a public cloud that they basically are in control of.
So we want to highlight that there may be variations in how those things get constructed when we look at the guts of it, but in reality, the offering exists in three options. Either provided through Cisco, or handled privately by the customer themselves, or through a partner.
Absolutely. Yes, exactly. That's what we started off by saying. These are the three main ones. But then you can find permutations of different variants of how I can do different things. But these are the three things that are kind of easier to identify and easier to think about that as a blueprint for deployment strategy. All right, good questions.